It was a cold, misty evening as John drove down the winding road, cutting through the dense Alaskan wilderness. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a dim glow that barely illuminated the towering pine trees. His car's headlights pierced through the fog, casting long shadows on the deserted road. He was miles away from civilization, with nothing but the hum of his engine and the occasional rustling of the trees in the wind. The road had been empty for the last hour, making the sudden sight ahead all the more alarming. A massive bear stood in the middle of the road. John slammed the brakes, his heart pounding. The bear, a hulking grizzly, locked eyes with him. It didn't budge. It didn't growl. It just stood there, staring, as if waiting for something. Something about the bear's posture seemed off. It wasn't acting aggressively, nor did it appear to be scavenging. Instead, it looked almost desperate. Then, John noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. A faint sound. A whimper, coming from the trees beside the road. John's grip tightened around the steering wheel as his pulse quickened. He had heard stories about bears attacking cars. But this one seemed different. It wasn't lunging at him or trying to scare him away. It just stood there, blocking his path, its deep brown eyes locked onto his. The soft whimpering sound came again, barely audible over the hum of the car's engine. It was coming from the dense tree line to the right of the road. John squinted into the darkness, trying to see past the underbrush, but the thick forest concealed whatever was making the noise. He hesitated. Common sense told him to stay in the car. This was a bear, after all. But something deep in his gut told him that this wasn't just a random encounter. Slowly, he reached for his flashlight in the glove compartment, rolled down his window just enough, and shined the beam outside. The bear didn't flinch. Instead, it let out a low, mournful sound, almost like a groan. It took a step back, not toward John, but toward the forest, toward the source of the sound. John swallowed hard. He knew this was a bad idea, but his curiosity, and his growing suspicion that something was wrong, got the better of him. He carefully unbuckled his seatbelt, grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, and cracked open the door. The cold night air rushed in as he stepped onto the damp asphalt. The bear still didn't move toward him. It wasn't threatening him at all. It was waiting. John took slow, cautious steps forward, keeping his flashlight trained on the forest's edge. That's when he saw it. A smaller shape, hidden among the fallen leaves and tangled roots. A bear cub. John's breath hitched. The cub was lying on its side, motionless, except for the faint rise and fall of its chest. It was breathing, but barely. Its fur was matted with mud, and there was something wrapped tightly around its hind leg. John took another step forward, shining his light closer. His heart sank when he saw the problem. A steel trap. The cub had wandered into a poacher's trap, its metal jaws clamped tightly around its leg. No wonder the mother bear had stopped him. She wasn't trying to attack. She was trying to get help. John's mind raced. He knew bears could be unpredictable, and even though this mother seemed desperate rather than aggressive, he was still in a dangerous situation. But one look at the cub, its tiny body trembling in pain, was enough to make up his mind. He had to help. Moving slowly so as not to alarm the mother bear, John knelt beside the cub. He examined the trap. It was old and rusted, but still tightly locked. He needed something to pry it open. His toolbox was in the trunk. His voice was barely above a whisper as he spoke. "I'll be right back, little guy." As he turned and walked toward the car, he felt the mother bear's gaze burning into his back. He didn't know if she understood what he was doing, but she didn't move. She just watched. John popped open the trunk and grabbed his tire iron. He also grabbed a thick blanket, hoping it would help keep the cub calm. Returning to the cub's side, he draped the blanket over its small body, careful not to cover its head. The mother bear let out a deep, guttural sound, and John froze. But she didn't charge. Instead, she huffed and shifted her weight, her massive paws digging into the dirt. Taking a deep breath, John wedged the tire iron into the rusted hinges of the trap. He pushed with all his strength, his muscles straining. The metal groaned in protest, but it didn't budge. He adjusted his grip and tried again. This time, the trap gave way, the jaws loosening just enough for John to pry it open with his hands. As soon as the steel released, the cub let out a weak cry and tried to move its leg. John exhaled in relief. The mother bear took a step closer. John's body tensed. He had done what he could. Now it was up to her. The massive bear lowered her head, sniffing her cub before gently nudging it with her nose. The little one let out a soft whimper, but it didn't seem as weak as before. John took slow steps backward, giving them space. He didn't want to test his luck. Then, something unexpected happened. The mother bear lifted her head and looked at him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. John wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but there was something in her eyes, something beyond instinct, a silent understanding. Then, without warning, she turned. With surprising gentleness, she nudged her cub up onto its feet, supporting its weight as they both disappeared into the forest. John stood there for a while, heart still pounding, breath visible in the cold night air. He had just witnessed something he would never forget. As the forest around him seemed to settle, the distant hoot of an owl echoed through the trees, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt still, as if nature itself had taken a collective breath. When he finally got back in his car and started the engine, he realized his hands were still shaking. As he drove off into the night, one thought echoed in his mind. The bear hadn't just stopped him for no reason. She had asked for his help, and he had answered. John's hands finally started to calm, though the trembling hadn't quite stopped. He looked down at the steering wheel, his fingers still gripping it a little too tightly. What would it have been like, he thought, to leave the road behind and follow that bear? To slip into the wild alongside her and her cub, to become part of something greater than oneself. But the thought was fleeting. The road ahead called him back to civilization, back to the noise and rush of everyday life. Still, as the mist thickened around him, he couldn't help but feel the echo of something profound, something not easily forgotten. He had done more than just help a helpless animal that night. He had found a moment of true connection. A quiet, unspoken bond between human and nature, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the hours passed, and the mist rolled across the road like a slow-moving ocean, John's mind wandered back to the forest, to the moment where he had made a choice to act out of compassion. He had never considered himself an animal lover, and yet, in that fleeting encounter, he had shared something with the wild that he would never fully understand. The tenderness of the mother bear's gaze stayed with him, a reminder of the delicate balance between man and nature. The road ahead would soon lead him back into a world of routine, but the connection to that moment lingered. There was a lesson in that silent gaze, in the quiet understanding between them. Sometimes, kindness and bravery come in the most unexpected forms, and sometimes, the wildest places teach us the deepest lessons about what it means to be truly alive. And so, as the headlights cut through the mist once more, John drove forward, but he carried something with him. A reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the world asks for our help in ways we least expect. The night stretched on, the road ahead long and winding, but within him there was a quiet peace, a knowing that what he had done would forever remain a part of him. He couldn't help but smile, a small, humble smile that reflected the simple yet profound beauty of that encounter. It was a moment he would carry with him, tucked away in the corners of his heart, a reminder of the quiet power of compassion. A bond forged in a place beyond words, where actions spoke louder than any voice could. As the journey continued, the thought lingered in his mind. What other moments like this might lie ahead, just waiting to be discovered? What other quiet calls for help might go unnoticed if we don't take the time to listen? And perhaps, just perhaps, the world was full of such moments. If we only had the courage to step outside our comfort zones, to listen with our hearts, and to embrace them when they appear. For it is in these moments, when we least expect it, that our lives are forever changed. For every small act of kindness, there's a ripple effect, a change that carries on far beyond what we can see. The road ahead was long, but now John saw it with new eyes, as though the journey was just as much about the moments we share as the distance we travel. And it was those moments, not the miles, that would define him. If you found yourself moved by this story, don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales. And if it made you smile, be sure to give it a like. Your support means the world, and together, we can keep spreading kindness, one small act at a time.